Before subscribing to another channel, subscribe to mine. Deep revenge stories, and tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are right now? My daughter's boyfriend showed up to Thanksgiving dinner with a leather portfolio. I noticed it the moment he walked through the front door. Not flowers, not wine, not even a pie from the grocery store bakery like every other young man who'd ever sat at my table. A leather portfolio, slim and black, tucked under his arm like he was arriving for a board meeting. He kissed my daughter on the cheek, shook my hand with both of his, and set the thing down beside his chair like it was the most natural thing in the world. My daughter. I'll call her my girl, because that's what she's always been to me. She smiled at me across the kitchen island the way she does when she wants me to behave. That small, pleading smile she inherited from her mother. I smiled back. I put the turkey on the table. I kept my mouth shut. His name is Corbett. I'll give him that much. It was a memorable name. Corbett Hale. He was 34, my daughter was 31, and they'd been together about 8 months when he first came to our house in Asheville, North Carolina, for the holiday. He worked in what he called private equity consulting, which I had learned over 2 phone calls with my daughter, meant he advised small businesses on attracting investors. He had an office downtown, a leased BMW, and an easy confidence that I recognized immediately. I'd worn that same confidence myself at his age, back when I was selling commercial real estate and thought I knew everything about everything. I was 63 years old, retired from 30 years in commercial real estate, and I knew exactly what a man looked like when he was selling something. I just didn't know yet what Corbett was selling. Dinner went well enough. My wife, Lorraine, had made her cornbread dressing and the sweet potato casserole with the marshmallows that my daughter has requested every Thanksgiving since she was 7 years old. Corbett ate 2 plates, complimented Lorraine 4 times, and asked me twice about my time in real estate. Good questions, actually, the kind that showed he'd done some research. I found myself relaxing against my better instincts. After dessert, Lorraine and my daughter went to the kitchen to deal with the dishes, which left Corbett and me at the table with 2 inches of bourbon and the football game on low in the background. He reached for the portfolio. "Sir," he said, and I noticed he'd been calling me sir all evening, which I'd thought was politeness, but which I now understood was positioning. "I've been wanting to talk to you about something. An opportunity, actually, for the family." I set down my glass. He opened the portfolio. Inside were printed pages, charts, a prospectus-style document with a logo at the top. The company was called Meridian Growth Partners. The opportunity, as Corbett explained it over the next 20 minutes, was a chance to get in on the ground floor of a private real estate fund targeting commercial properties in secondary markets across the Southeast. He said the minimum investment was $150,000. He said early investors were already seeing projected returns of 18 to 22% annually. He said he was bringing this to me specifically because of my background, because I'd understand it in a way most people wouldn't, because this was the kind of thing that only came around once. He said my daughter knew he was going to bring this up, and she thought it was a great idea. I looked at those printed pages for a long moment. The charts were professionally done. The language was sophisticated. Anyone without 30 years in commercial real estate might have been impressed. I knew within 30 seconds that the numbers didn't work. Not in the way that bad numbers don't work. In the way that made-up numbers don't work. "I'll take a look at it," I said. I closed the portfolio. I handed it back to him. He seemed surprised I hadn't asked more questions. He recovered quickly. "Of course. Take all the time you need." I called my daughter into the room. She came in drying her hands on a dish towel, and I watched her face. Corbett gave her a small nod. "Everything going fine," and she smiled. That smile again, but this time I saw something underneath it. Something I hadn't been looking for before. "Sweetheart," I said, "did you look at these documents yourself?" She shook her head, but in that way that means yes. I glanced at them, but I didn't really read them. "Do you know what Meridian Growth Partners is?" "It's Corbett's fund," she said. "He's been building it for 2 years. His fund, so he's not consulting for outside clients. He's raising capital for his own vehicle." She looked at Corbett. He said quickly, "It's both, actually. I do consulting work and I run the fund. They complement each other." I nodded. I told them both I was tired from the cooking and the drive over from my brother's place that morning. I thanked Corbett for coming. I watched him put the portfolio back under his arm. That night, after they left, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop for 3 hours. Meridian Growth Partners had a website. It was clean, well-designed, with stock photography of skylines and handshakes. It listed Corbett Hale as the managing director. It listed 3 other principals whose LinkedIn profiles I searched one by one. 2 had no verifiable employment history beyond what appeared on Meridian's own site, and 1 appeared to have been terminated from a registered investment advisory firm in Charlotte in 2019 after a client complaint. I couldn't find the details of the complaint, but the termination was in the FinRe database, which is public. The fund itself was registered as an LLC in Delaware, filed 18 months ago. I found no SEC registration, no Form D exemption filing for a private offering, nothing that a legitimate fundraising $150,000 minimums from investors would be required to file. I am not a securities lawyer, but I spent 3 decades doing commercial real estate transactions, and I have sat across the table from enough compliance attorneys to know when something is missing. I called my daughter at 11 p.m. She didn't answer. I sent her a text. Call me tomorrow morning. Just you. She called at 8:30. Corbett was still asleep, she said. I told her what I'd found. I went slowly. I didn't editorialize. I just walked her through each thing. The FinRe record. The missing SEC filings. The principals who seem to exist primarily on Meridian's website. I let the silence after each item do its own work. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. He told me his last partner had filed a false complaint against him, she said finally. At his old firm. When did he tell you that? Another pause. About a month ago, after I asked him about a gap in his resume. Did he show you any documentation of that? He said he'd show me later. He said it was still in litigation. Sweetheart, the FinRe record shows he was the subject of the complaint, not that a false complaint was filed against him. Those are different things. I heard her breathing on the other end of the line. He's asked me about your retirement accounts before, she said quietly. I thought it was just curiosity. He'd asked how much you might have liquid. My hand tightened on the phone. I asked her how long that had been going on. She said 2 or 3 months. Little questions, scattered through conversations. How well had I done in real estate? What did retirement look like for someone in my position? Whether I'd ever invested in private funds before. Has he asked you for money? I said, directly. From your account. The pause before she answered was about 2 seconds too long. He needed help with a bridge payment last spring, she said, for the fund's operating costs. I gave him $12,000. He said he'd pay it back when the next investor closed. I closed my eyes. Has he paid it back? He said the close got delayed. He said it would happen by the end of the year. It was the Friday after Thanksgiving. It was 11 months after she'd given him that money. I'm going to pause here and say something directly to anyone watching this. If a person you're dating starts asking careful questions about your parents' finances within the first few months and then asks you for a bridge loan for their business before the year is out, that is not a coincidence. That is a sequence. And sequences have authors. I didn't say that to my daughter on the phone. She was already crying, quietly, in the way she does when she's trying not to let me hear it. I just told her I loved her. And I told her not to tell Corbett we'd spoken. And I told her I was going to make some calls. The first call I made was to a man I'll call my old colleague. We'd worked together on commercial deals for most of the 90s, and he now ran a small firm that did due diligence work for institutional investors. I told him what I had. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Send me the prospectus. Give me 48 hours." The second call I made was to a securities attorney I'd been referred to by my estate lawyer. I didn't retain him yet. I just had a conversation. He told me that operating an unregistered investment fund and soliciting investors without proper disclosure was a federal matter, specifically SEC jurisdiction, and that the threshold for opening an inquiry was lower than most people assumed. I made copies of everything Corbett had given me. I scanned the prospectus. I sent it to my old colleague. Then I waited. I am a patient man. 30 years in real estate will do that to you. The deals that go bad almost always go bad because someone moved too fast. 48 hours later, my old colleague called me back. "Where did you find this guy?" he said. The fund's projected returns were built on assumptions that didn't correspond to any actual acquisition pipeline he could verify. Two of the properties, listed as under letter of intent, were publicly listed on commercial databases as either already sold to other buyers or still actively listed with no pending offers. One of the listed properties was in a flood zone that had been flagged by the county 2 years prior, which any legitimate fund manager doing basic due diligence would have caught. "This is either grossly incompetent or deliberately misleading," my old colleague said. Given the FinRe record, I wouldn't bet on incompetent. I asked him if he'd be willing to put that in writing in a format I could use. He said he would. That weekend, my daughter came to our house alone. She sat at the same kitchen table where Corbett had shown me his portfolio 4 days earlier. Lorraine made coffee and then quietly went to the other room because she understood without being asked that this was a conversation that needed space. My daughter had gone through her bank records the night before. $12,000 in the spring. Another $800 she'd sent him in August for what he said was a vendor invoice he needed to cover while waiting on a wire. 2 dinners she'd put on her credit card for what he called investor meetings. $340 and $290. Total, just over $13,000. She was not a wealthy young woman. She was an occupational therapist at a hospital. $13,000 was real money to her. She sat across from me and said, "Dad, I feel so stupid." I told her what I'm going to tell you. Smart people get targeted precisely because they're smart enough to be embarrassed when they realize what happened. That embarrassment is part of the design. It keeps them quiet. It keeps them from going to the people who could help them. "You called me," I said. "That's not stupid. That's the only thing that matters." She ended the relationship the following week. She didn't tell Corbett why at first. She just ended it. He called her 14 times in 3 days. He sent emails that sort of apologetic and turned hostile. In one of the emails he mentioned, without quite saying it directly, that she wouldn't want things to get complicated given that she'd participated in conversations about the fund. She forwarded that email to me immediately. I forwarded it to the securities attorney. He said it was potentially significant and suggested we preserve everything. I contacted the SEC's online tip and complaint center. I submitted a detailed complaint with supporting documentation, the prospectus, my old colleague's written analysis, the FinRe record, my daughter's bank transfer records with her permission, and Corbett's email. I did it calmly, methodically, the way I'd close a difficult deal. You gather your documents. You make sure your facts are in order. You submit. Then you wait. I want to tell you that everything happened quickly after that, but it didn't. It was 7 months. 7 months during which my daughter slowly put herself back together. She started seeing a therapist, not because she was broken, but because she's wise enough to know that being deliberately deceived by someone you trusted is worth talking through with a professional. She took a trip with her college roommate to Colorado. She called me more often, for no particular reason, just to talk. 7 months during which I went about my retired life. I had coffee with my old colleagues. I took Lorraine to Savannah for our anniversary. I worked on the garden in the back. I did not obsess. I had done what I could do, through the proper channels with documentation and legal advice. The rest was not mine to control. Then one afternoon in early July, my daughter called me. "Dad," she said, "you need to look up Corbett's name." I typed it into Google while she was still on the phone. The SEC had announced an emergency enforcement action against Meridian Growth Partners and its managing director. The complaint alleged that Corbett had raised approximately $1.4 million from 14 investors over 22 months through material misrepresentations about the fund's assets, its investment strategy, and its regulatory status. 2 of those investors were retirees in South Carolina. The assets of the fund had been frozen. A parallel criminal referral was being coordinated with the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of North Carolina. I read that last line twice. "Are you there?" my daughter said. "I'm here. Are you okay?" I looked out my kitchen window at the bird feeder Lorraine had put up last spring, the same kitchen window I'd been looking out of for 11 years. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had. "I'm fine," I said. "I'm just thinking." "About what?" "About the fact that you called me," I said. "From the beginning. You called me, and you told me the truth. And that's the only reason any of this happened the way it did." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thanks for not making me feel like an idiot." "You were never an idiot," I said. "You were targeted. There's a difference. And now there are 14 other families who might get some part of their money back because you were brave enough to tell your father the truth at Thanksgiving." Corbett Hale entered a guilty plea the following spring. Wire fraud and securities fraud. Federal sentencing guidelines in those cases are not gentle. He was ordered to pay restitution to all 14 investors. My daughter's $13,000 was included in the restitution order. She's doing well. She's seeing someone new, a high school history teacher from Weaverville who brought a bottle of local wine to her birthday dinner and spent most of the evening asking Lorraine about her cornbread dressing recipe. I like him a great deal. He has never once asked me about my retirement accounts. And every Thanksgiving, when I carve the turkey and look around that table at my family, I think about a leather portfolio that got set down beside a chair in my dining room, and the particular kind of patience it takes to let a man believe his plan is working until the moment it isn't. My daughter's not stupid. She was trusting. There's a difference. And she was brave enough to make one phone call at the right moment. Sometimes one phone call is everything. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever sat across a table from someone who was smiling while they counted your money, leave me a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. I'll be back with another story soon. The tools these people use get more sophisticated every year. The only thing that stays the same is what stops them. It's always a family member who decides to speak up. I've thought a lot about what made Corbett believe he could walk into my home on Thanksgiving, set a leather portfolio down at my dinner table, and walk out with a check. And the honest answer is, he'd done it before. Not to me, to other people who were just as capable, just as experienced, just as certain they could spot a bad deal from across a room. The SEC complaint eventually listed 14 investors, 14 people who had looked at those same charts, heard that same confident voice, and decided the opportunity was real. Some of them were retirees. Some of them were retirees. Some of them had spent their whole working lives building what Corbett spent 20 minutes trying to take. That's not stupidity. I want to be clear about that. People like Corbett don't succeed by targeting fools. They succeed by targeting people who are trusting, who are generous, who believe that someone dating their daughter wouldn't look them in the eye and lie. That trust is not a weakness. It's what makes a family function. Corbett just knew how to find it and use it. What he didn't plan for was my daughter making one phone call. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not the documents I found, not the FinRay database, not the securities attorney or the SEC complaint I filed. All of that mattered. But none of it happens without her calling me at 8:30 in the morning and telling me the truth, even though she was embarrassed, even though she was still processing what it meant, even though part of her probably hoped I'd find a different explanation. Telling the truth when you're ashamed of what happened. That takes something. It takes the kind of character that doesn't develop overnight. My daughter had it because she'd been honest her whole life, even when it cost her something. That's not an accident. That's a choice people make, over and over, in small moments, long before any crisis arrives. And Corbett, I don't think he ever made that choice. Not once. Every step he took was a calculation. What can I get? What can I say? What story will this person believe? 14 investors and one Thanksgiving dinner later, that way of moving through the world caught up with him. It always does. Not because the universe is keeping score in any mystical sense, but because a life built entirely on deception requires an impossible amount of maintenance. You have to remember every lie. You have to manage every person. You have to keep all the plates spinning simultaneously. At some point, one falls. And when it does, they all fall. Corbett's plate fell on a Friday morning in November when my daughter decided her father deserved the truth. What I want anyone watching this to take away is simple. It's not about being suspicious of everyone you meet. It's not about building walls or assuming the worst. It's about this: the people in your life who are willing to tell you hard things at the cost of their own comfort are the most valuable people you will ever have. My daughter could have stayed quiet. She could have been too embarrassed to say it out loud. She could have waited to see if Corbett paid her back, told herself it would work out. Instead, she called, and that one decision changed everything. For her, for me, and ultimately for 13 other families who got at least part of their money returned because there was a paper trail that started with a conversation at my kitchen table. Protect your integrity. Use your mind. And when something feels wrong, even when you're not sure, even when you're embarrassed, say it out loud to someone you trust. That's the whole story.